The events begin on the 3rd of February. Walter Sparrow is an employee of a stray animal trapping service. He leads an unremarkable life and often experiences boredom. Further events take us back to December 23rd. It was Christmas Eve. Walter lives with his son Robin and wife Agatha. Today Walter is going to attend a corporate event organized at work, although he is not keen on it. His tipsy colleague Sybil openly flirts with him, but Walter is not interested. In the present, Sybil sends him on an urgent call. Walter arrives at the address to catch an aggressive dog. With his expertise in handling animals, he easily handles the task. However, upon seeing the name Ned on the dog's collar, Walter hesitates, and it was his mistake. The dog bit him and ran away. Agatha owns her own bakery. She's done for the day. Meanwhile, Walter continued to pursue the dog, which led him to an old cemetery. At some point, Walter's gaze fell on the tombstone of a certain Laura Tollins. Agatha waited for her husband for a long time. To pass the time, she decided to go to a bookstore. Her attention was caught by a book titled The Number 23. Perhaps it was fate. If Walter hadn't offended Sybil at the party, she wouldn't have sent him after that dog, and he wouldn't have been late to meet Agatha. Nevertheless, it happened. Today is Walter's birthday. The wife gave him the book The Number 23 about a heartbreaking journey into the world of paranoia. After that, the couple met with friends to celebrate Walter's birthday. However, for some reason this book just won't get out of his head. The couple returned home late, unaware that their son's girlfriend had been visiting. Robin gave his father a gift. Of course, Walter guessed that the son wasn't home alone, but Walter didn't mind. On that same night, Walter began to read the book. On the 4th of February, he went to work as usual. The management asked him about the dog that bit him. Walter assured that it was his mistake because he got distracted. The management gave him the day off. Of course, Walter was glad because he could dedicate this day to reading, delving deeper into the story of a boy who aspired to study well to become a detective. However, his father, being an accountant, disapproved because he wanted the son to follow in his footsteps. The mother, on the contrary, supported the son in his pursuit. The boy often caught the neighbor's dog, which wandered onto their property. Feeling like the hero of a detective story, the boy once disobeyed his father's prohibition, and following the dog, entered the neighbor's house. There he saw Mrs. Dobkins, the widow, lifeless. The doctor concluded that the woman voluntarily left life, but the boy didn't believe it. From that moment, Detective Fingerling was born. Walter told Agatha that Fingerling's childhood reminds him of his own, like it was his memories. Of course, Agatha considered it ordinary coincidences. However, Walter finds it all strange. In his childhood, he also caught the neighbor's dog, collected detective stories, and the widow Dobkins reminded him of his own mother, who had long passed away. Walter immersed himself in this story again. Another chapter was dedicated to a beautiful woman named Fabrizia. At night, Walter couldn't sleep, thinking about the book. At some point, a strange feeling enveloped him, as if he were living someone else's life. Sinister shadows appeared on the walls. The 5th of February arrived. Even at work, Walter couldn't tear himself away from reading. In the next chapter, Detective Fingerling tried to dissuade a blonde who was about to voluntarily pass away from this rash act. In the end, he succeeded. The girl shared that she used to be a good person, but now everything changed. The girl also confessed that the number 23 haunted her everywhere. Dates, times, book pages, floor numbering in elevators, wherever the blonde went, this number was always with her. Detective Fingerling was puzzled. To distract the blonde, he told her about his uncle, who predicted through the stars that would fall in love with a woman in red. It indeed happened. The uncle married that woman, but 2 years later, she divorced him and took everything. Detective Fingerling believed that the girl was smarter than his uncle. He left her house with a clear conscience. But as soon as he stepped out, the girl finished what she had started. She was beyond saving. The next day, the detective went to the blonde's ex-boyfriend and found him lifeless. His house became a crime scene. When Fingerling told his beloved Fabrizia about the blonde, she begged him to take her to that apartment. It was obvious that the blonde was truly obsessed with the number 23, which drove her insane. Walter noticed that the number 23 began to surround him too. He went to the bookstore to inquire about this novel. However, the seller had never heard of this author, who hadn't written any other books except for this one. At home, Walter tried to prove to his wife and son that he too was somehow connected to the number 23, and therefore this book was an imitation of his life. Agatha couldn't understand how her husband could draw such crazy conclusions from a made-up story. However, Walter continued to insist that the book's author knew a lot about him. Robin found reason to joke about it. Walter continued reading, envisioning himself as Detective Fingerling. Because of this, Walter couldn't sleep at night, completely detached from real life. Also, Walter continued to see the number 23 everywhere. On the morning of the 6th of February, Agatha saw her husband sleeping on the couch. Black marker calculations related to the number 23 and ominous phrases were written on his wrist. Later, Walter told Professor Isaac French, a family friend, about the number 23 and the book that resembled an alternative version of his own life. Isaac simply said that people believe what they want to believe and find coincidences where there are none. Before Walter left, Isaac advised him to finish reading the book and promised to talk to Agatha. Walter followed his advice. Like him, Fingerling began to see the number 23 everywhere. Moreover, Fingerling was haunted by dark fantasies. Dr. Miles Phoenix, a psychotherapist, advised him to take a vacation and promised to talk to Fabrizia. She was upset that Fingerling decided to leave his detective job for a while. He in turn began to lose his mind because the number 23 was haunting him. Fabrizia called him abnormal, but Fingerling seemed not to hear her, continuing to search for coincidences related to the number 23 around him. He concluded that this number was everywhere. Previously it haunted the blonde, now it's haunting him. One day, Fingerling saw Fabrizia with Dr. Miles Phoenix. They had been having a secret affair all this time. Driven by hatred and revenge, Fingerling took the psychotherapist's life. Walter suspected that Agatha might have an affair with Isaac. Later, he saw them talking in the bakery. Jealousy immediately clouded Walter's mind. Nonetheless, he began reading the 21st chapter, in which Fingerling tracked Fabrizia, who was unfaithful to him. At night, Walter couldn't sleep and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. At some point, he noticed that one of the knives was missing. In panic returning to the room, Walter saw Agatha lifeless. Did he do this? It turned out to be just a nightmare. Nevertheless, the number 23 continues to haunt Walter. Agatha woke up to her husband starting the car and driving off somewhere. On the table she saw a note from Walter, saying that he just needed one night to clear his mind. While driving, Walter sees the number 23 everywhere around him. He stopped at a hotel where he was offered the 27th room. Walter wanted to check into room 23rd, but the receptionist said there were issues with the bathroom. Walter began reading the 22nd chapter, in which Fingerling decided to punish Fabrizia. The police found her lifeless. Fingerling, who was not yet suspected, went insane. Walter was disappointed to see that the book ended with the 22nd chapter. After that, there were only blank pages. Now Walter is wondering if the number that haunted Fingerling will influence his own destiny. Suddenly, under the hotel window, Walter saw the very dog that had bitten him recently. Believing that the animal was to blame for everything, Walter chased after it. This led him back to the old cemetery, to Laura Tullen's grave. The dog's owner, a gardener working at the church, appeared. Walter asked the priest about Laura, who passed away when she was 23. The priest said it wasn't quite like that. In reality, the grave was empty. At home, Walter told his family and Isaac that this book is not simple. He also talked about Laura, who went missing 15 years ago. Since there were signs pointing to a crime, Laura's family held a funeral. The suspect was Kyle Flinch, a professor. He and Laura had a secret affair. Walter is convinced that Kyle Flinch is the author of the book, publishing under the pseudonym Topsycrats. The thing is, everything happened between Kyle and Laura just as it did between Fingerling and Fabrizia in the book. Agatha becomes increasingly convinced that her husband has gone mad. In search of answers, Walter went to the prison to meet Kyle Flinch in person. Walter explained that he was not a reporter but someone experiencing the same things as the main character in the book. Kyle claimed he was wrongly convicted of a crime he didn't commit. He also said he didn't write any book, and Topsycrats is not a pseudonym. Kyle no longer wanted to continue the conversation, thinking Walter had mental issues. Despite everything, Walter was determined to find Topsycrats. Robin, who also read the book, mentioned seeing a mailing address on one of the blank pages. It was to this address that Walter was going to send 23 empty boxes. More than anything, Walter is afraid of harming Agatha, but she doesn't believe her husband would do such a thing. Agatha intends to go with him tomorrow to put an end to this madness together. 23 empty boxes were delivered to the post office. Walter, Agatha, and Robin waited in the car, hoping someone would show up. At some point, they noticed a suspicious man who was perplexed, unpacking the empty boxes. Suddenly, Walter approached him, showed the book, and said the game was over. In panic, the man ran, but Walter caught up with him. The man then inflicted an injury on himself incompatible with life. Witnesses immediately called an ambulance. Walter understands that if this man doesn't survive, the secret of the number 23 will remain a mystery. Agatha ordered him to take their son and go home, otherwise he might make things worse. Agatha stayed with the man, who whispered to her about some institute. That's where they would find all the answers. Walter and Robin waited home for news. Soon Agatha called and said the man didn't make it. She lied that she couldn't get his name. In reality, Agatha managed to discreetly take his documents. She went to the institute while Walter searched for clues in the book. The institute building seemed abandoned. Walter, meanwhile, was struck by a horrifying hunch, and he called to his son. Agatha entered one of the rooms while Walter explained to Robin that he compiled all the 23rd words of the 23rd pages into a sentence, revealing a clue to go to Casanova Park. Agatha saw that the number 23 was written on the walls. Perhaps this number drove that man insane. The question is whether that man was Topsycrats. Agatha didn't immediately notice that she wasn't alone here. Meanwhile, The father and son arrived at Casanova Park and, following the clue, began digging. Suddenly, they heard a noise in the bushes. Despite everything, Walter continued digging while Robin was shining a flashlight. Soon they indeed found remains, after which hurried away. At the first opportunity, Walter called the police. But when the officers arrived, the remains were gone. Walter explained to the officer at length about the book, the number 23 and everything else. However, the police deemed him insane. Agatha arrived to take her husband and son. Robin is convinced that the man they mistook for Topsycrats is not a criminal. The real criminal is still free, otherwise the remains wouldn't have disappeared. Agatha asked her husband and son to stop this madness, shouting that 23 is just a number and only people attach any meaning to it. Suddenly, Walter abruptly stopped, seeing Ned the dog in the middle of the road. After a minute, Walter noticed that his wife's hands were in the soil. At home, as Agatha washed her hands, Walter claimed he knows the truth. She was the one who took the remains and wrote the book. No one knew Walter as well as his wife. She used facts from his biography. Obviously, Agatha is Topsycrats. The man at the post office is the one who published her book. Now Walter wonders whom he lived with all these 13 years. Robin witnessed a conversation between the parents. Agatha confessed to taking the remains, but it was Walter, not she, who actually wrote the book. To prove her words, she showed the original manuscript she managed to find in the institute. Walter's name was there. He refuses to believe it, but everything points to the fact that Agatha is not lying. Apparently, Walter used old journals and his own memories to draw inspiration for the characters in his book. Realizing the horrifying truth, Walter rushed to escape. But can one escape from their own madness? Now Walter doesn't know who he is. The answer lies in the last, 23rd chapter. It turns out that after Walter's mother voluntarily left life, his father couldn't cope with the loss and did the same after some time. Since then, the number 23, which meant something to his father, haunted Walter for many years, right up until he entered college. But meeting Laura Tullins changed everything. Walter loved her, but soon the number 23 began to haunt him again. Walter slowly descended into madness and suspected Laura of infidelity. This led him to take her life, which occurred in the 23rd room. Afterward, Walter hurried to cover up the traces of his crime in Casanova Park. Professor Flinch, whom Laura was supposed to meet at the hotel, eventually became the main suspect. Walter wrote a metaphorical book about his life. Shortly afterward, he tried to harm himself, but was unsuccessful. Due to a head injury, many memories were erased from Walter's mind. After rehabilitation in a clinic, Walter created the impression of a normal, healthy person. On the day of his discharge, he met Agatha, who knew nothing about his past. However, 13 years later, Agatha found the book, or perhaps the book found her. In the present, Agatha told her husband that he was sick, not a bad person. But Walter feels guilt, as an innocent man is in prison because of him. In desperation, Agatha begs her husband to let go of the past and continue living as before. However, Walter cannot do it. There is no such thing as fate, only the right to choose. Walter made his choice. Family is the most important thing in his life, but on the other hand, he must be accountable for his actions. Finally, Laura found peace. Walter went to the police and voluntarily surrendered. He was arrested, but his wife and son did not abandon him. In the end, it turned out that 23 is just a number that means nothing.